fact that we're, sorry, I should also say that the fact that we're doing this on a day when we're set to smash heat records again in Western Canada, that irony is not lost on us and is actually putting kind of a big exclamation mark on today's event. So thanks for taking the time to join. My name is Dave Erb, and I serve as the director here of POW Canada. Before I introduce the speakers and jump into the heart of the presentation, I'd like to just give a 2 or 3 minute intro to POW Canada and how we go about our work. The first thing to know is Protect Our Winters is a not-for-profit organization, and we're really working to organize and unite the outdoor industry in Canada to have a collective voice on climate action. Like all other sectors of the Canadian economy, they do this. And the outdoor industry is one of the largest sectors of the Canadian economy. It's up there at the very top. But we've never done that. We've never positioned ourselves in a way that we can have influence over policy that's important to us. But as I mentioned, the other sectors do that, and they do it really well, and they do it regularly. They lobby for policy that favors their industry. And we believe that the most pressing issue facing the outdoor industry right now is climate change. So at the end of the day, Protect Our Winters works to lobby the government for pushing aggressive policy action or policy solutions to climate change. We've had some really big policy wins in the last year, including a couple just in the last month, and there's another one that we've been working on over 6 or 7 months, Bill C-12, and that's just going through the Senate right now, and that will be a really significant win for us too. So there's a bit of there's strategy behind our work, and it's paying off, and we really feel like we have a secret sauce right now that is working. But I can tell you that the success of our movement is based entirely on the size of our movement. So the more members we have, the more influence we have. Auden sometimes talks about social movements, and Auden, I apologize if I'm stealing any of your thunder with this, but throughout history, social movements have really been responsible for ushering in like radical social change. Social movements, they simply elevate and push issues with the hope of getting governments to listen and take action on them. So POW is a key part of the greater climate movement, and we're building the movement. We're building a movement of businesses and athletes and everyday enthusiasts who are ready to get involved in this fight to hopefully save and protect these places and experiences that we love. And I think that's where resorts tie in. You guys, there's no doubt you're on the front lines of climate change. And we think that resorts are foundational to the success of our movement. And we've created this program that we think is barrier-free, and we need everybody on board 100%. So know that we use the expression "winter is in our hands," and we literally think that it is. We're in a position right now where we can dictate the outcome. We can get ourselves organized to really determine the success of our efforts in the movement, and that's going to really end up it's going to end up determining the future of the outdoor industry in general. So today we're going to hear from Izzy. She's going to talk about our program. She's going to be our final speaker, and she'll tell you that our program isn't really focused on your internal sustainability efforts. We trust that you're doing good things on that front, but instead our program is really focused on advocacy and specifically leveraging the relationships with your guests and your members to help grow awareness around climate and also to help grow our movement. So that's it about POW. As I say, we'll jump into things now. Over the next hour, we're going to hear from Dan Scott, from Auden, and from Izzy, and then we'll have some time at the end for question and answer. But don't hesitate to put any comments you have into the chat feature, into the comments section. So I think Dan Izzy and Auden will monitor that as they're presenting and try to answer questions on the fly. Just as I know we're all like 16 or 18 months into this whole new Skype reality, so we're pros with this stuff, but just as a reminder for best practice to keep microphones on mute during the presentation. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Dan, Dr. Dan Scott. I often describe Dan as like the rock star of the intersection where climate change and tourism intersect. He's the founding executive director of the Climate Institute at the University of Waterloo, where I'm based here in Waterloo as well. And he's worked on climate change and global tourism for 20 years and has advised a wide range of governments and businesses, including the United Nations, the World Bank, European Tourism Commission, the World Travel and Tourism Council, and the International Olympic Committee. That's a pretty impressive list of things to be involved with, but I know at the very top of Dan's list is the fact that he's also on the board of directors of POW Canada, where he's actively involved. So Dan, thanks for joining us, and please take this away.
All right, thanks, Dave. So everybody, I'm going to try to share my screen with you successfully. All right, Izzy, are we getting a full screen view? We're good to go. So everyone where you are, I hope all of you are coping with your respective heat waves in the part of country you're in. As Dave said, it's a bit surreal to be talking skiing when parts of Canada are actually hotter than Dubai at the moment. But as Dave said, this sort of record-breaking heat is a bit of an unfortunate reminder that we don't have to wait decades into the future for climate change to impact our lives and businesses. You know, occasionally it's going to creep up, and we're going to see it in the next 5 years, next 10 years, next couple of months, not just decades down the future. And so, as Dave noted, I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the state of science on climate change risk and opportunities for our industry. And opportunity is an important word there, because in my view, ski tourism can very much be part of a net zero economy of mid-century, and we need to really tell that story a little bit more. There we go. So I'm going to start with the two types of risk, climate change risk, that we'll go through a little bit in the next 10 minutes that I've got. And also importantly, you know, who's asking for this information? Some of this, many of you will be familiar with, but, you know, certainly on the physical climate risk, you know, how does a changing climate, what does it mean for our operations, future planning and investments, potential demand? But the second kind of risk is on the decarbonization, or what we call transition risk. So reducing emissions from your operations, but more broadly, realigning your business model to be part of a decarbonized economy in 15, 30 years from now. How do you get your customers to you? That sort of thing. And in the middle of this slide, I've got, you know, who's asking these questions about your climate risk. And I've been asked by everybody on this list. So everything from pension fund and institutional investors, real estate developers, banks, even high net worth skiers looking for answers. So if they're asking me these questions, there's certainly a lot more dialogue that's going on behind the scenes, and Auden can speak to some of that as well. The other thing I wanted to point out to you, just, and many of you will already be aware of this, but the G7, when they met last week, committed to mandatory corporate climate risk disclosure. So this is in the financial market, so that it basically in the next year, 3 years max, probably every publicly traded company is going to have to assess and disclose its risk. So those of you who are part of conglomerates, you'll be part of this. Happy to say more about what does that actually look like for those of you who might want to get out in front of these kinds of questions, but we can talk about that a bit more. So in terms of the first risk, physical climate risk, the one you'll be all very familiar with, what I've done on this map is just outline some of the available science that's available in all of the different regional markets across North America. My team and I work a lot with some Austrians in other parts of the world, but we've modeled all of using the newest climate change scenarios, all of the different regional markets here in North America. We've published the work on the East, Midwest coming out literally in a day, a week or so. We haven't actually published the stuff on the West. That is available. Happy to talk to you about that. Those of you that are interested there, happy to help you interpret other climate science that's available in your regions. The other thing that I will point out though is in many of these regions, there are other studies that are available to you, and I can put you in connect you with those if you want. I'd give you some caution about those. There's some important caveats about those, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But let's start with some of the stuff that's publicly available, and that's on the eastern region, eastern markets. So what this set of INSAT maps have is you've got Ontario, Quebec, and then the US Northeast markets. At the bottom, you've got season length by different color codes, so you can see roughly your area if you're located in one of these areas. You've got on the left side a low emission future, and on the right side a high emission future, and then you've got 2050s and then 2080s. So 2050s actually means the 40s, 50s, and 60s. We average it out into that center. A couple of the key messages that you probably see quite quickly is there's a big difference between the low and the high emission future. They're fundamentally different future conditions for your businesses. We want that low emission future, and we should all be strong advocates, as Dave said, for climate action that gets us there. Importantly, sort of a net zero scenario or ambitions that more governments are talking about, including Canada and the US, is actually even a better scenario than that low emission future that I've got there. So that's increasingly what governments and business are working towards, which is great. The other key thing that you'll obviously see right away is differential risk. That means market opportunities for some, it means greater challenges for others. So if we look at even in the 2050s low emission future, some of the more southern, lower lying ski areas in the Northeast region, they're going to struggle, right? In the Great Lakes, we've got changing ratios of lake and rain effect going on, whereas in Quebec, higher latitude, colder temperatures, good for snowmaking, they're able to maintain their ski seasons quite well, even through the high emission scenario. So these are some important differences to look at. To maintain those seasons obviously requires additional snowmaking as temperatures get low or get higher. And you can see on the left side, what does that entail for different parts of the market, averaged out by Ontario, Quebec, and the Northeast. So those are some of the key physical risks that we're going to see over time. The other thing that often gets overlooked by some is, as changes in supply occur, so too might changes in demand. And what we've seen in what we call climate change analog years, but in plain language, record warm winters that we've already seen, is that demand actually is fairly resilient across markets that we've looked at in North America, but also in Europe and elsewhere. Demand usually comes down in those record warm winters, only about 10–15% in terms of skier visits. So that's pretty robust. And again, those are usually one-off years, but maybe two in a row. But if that demand stays relatively stable and supply shrinks in some areas, you've got a situation like this, and this is for the US Northeast where they have better data. But skier visit or skier per acre day, that sort of congestion potential increases 20, even 40%. And so to avoid some of that congestion, maintain visitor experience, we're going to have to invest in lift capacity, parking, and all the other services that allow those sorts of things to happen. So that's something we think of climate change, and I tell banks and others, well, we're going to have to invest, and they sort of sometimes look at me a bit puzzled. What do you mean we're going to have to invest? And this is part of the reason why. It's not just with snowmaking. The other point that I wanted to mention with this, and I mentioned a caution, be critical of the science you see out there. There are some studies that are problematic, and I'm going to again use the US Northeast as an illustration for this. The blue bars that you see there, the top one is the observed, so that's the National Ski Areas Association data, average season length from 1981 to 2010. The line below that Scott et al., that's our model trying to model that same period of time. And our model actually came out with 2-day longer season. And then you see another study that came out of the States a couple of years back. their attempt to model that same baseline was showing a ski season a month shorter than it actually is. And so our working assumption or our bottom line is always, if your model can't replicate observations today, what business does it have, talking about climate change risk? And we can test that. So the orange bars, again, you've got the observed record warm season in this region. You've got our model, which was 8 days shorter. And the reason for that is, occasionally there'll be days when you might stay open, even though, conditions are marginal. That's a business decision that we can't model. We can model the physical conditions, but we can't model those sorts of things. The take home point there is that other study, was showing a ski season 2 months shorter. And that's problematic to me. And the reason why is, investors, lenders, they see headlines that are generated by these sorts of things. And that's dangerous for all of us, because I think it does misrepresent the climate risk. And this isn't just a Northeast region issue. We've seen it in the Midwest, to a slightly smaller extent in the Rocky Mountain region, but also in BC. So be cautious. Again, I'm always here as a resource. If you ever want to ask questions about any of this, happy to do so. The other challenge that I mentioned off the bat that we have is the low carbon transition. So what's that going to mean to you? Well, first of all, there is going to be increasing carbon prices. There's no avoiding that. Canada's got those built in. The International Energy Agency, the IMF, all are making calls for global carbon prices, some kind of standard for that. So to make now, some of you probably been doing that for 5-10 years already anyway. There's going to be an investment to decarbonize some of your assets over time, and that may look daunting at first, but the storyline here is actually a very positive one in my view. Operations can basically be electrified. The technology exists, it's mature, it's market ready. These from the groups areas. So the technology is there when you're ready to invest in it. It's there for you. And then the second point is, the grids, the green map that you've got on the right side, the grid for many of you, certainly Quebec, BC is really good, Ontario is pretty good as well, is effectively decarbonized already. So if you have to double, snowmaker doesn't. And all of most of your customers can get to you with decarbonized transport in the next 10, 15 kind of years. So if you can keep, by snowmaking and keeping operating as a winter tourism destination, keep people closer to home, keep some of them off aircraft going from the Caribbean, you're actually part of that net zero solution. And that's a story that we need to tell governments. One of the exceptions, obviously, is if you've got a large international or fly-in visitors, you've got some additional challenges to overcome. But for the majority of you, your business model can be easily made compatible with a net zero economy that governments want us to be in over the next 20 to 30 years. And so we can be strong advocates of those public policies and know that it's actually in our best interest as a sector. And I'm sure many of you will have seen this announcement that came out, I think it was last week, maybe the week before now. And some of you will be included in it just by virtue of your corporate structure. And I'm sure Auden will say more about this, but I'll just say a couple things. It's great to see others aligning to what Aspen and POW have been sort of trying to push for and doing for a decade. So that's great to see. Hopefully we'll maybe see a similar Canadian statement from our industry come out in the not too distant future. That being said, what I've bolded a couple points that are the ones that are actually relevant to the climate action. And in the red side on the right, I've posed some questions that the media and others are going to ask, what are the timelines for some of these things? What's included in carbon neutral? Is it just on-site operations, or does it include what we call scope 3? That's people coming to you and supply chain issues and things like that. Those sorts of things, advocacy, does that mean no longer funding political campaigns for parties who have no climate plan? Those, the devil in the details on those things, and hopefully those details will coming out. Maybe Auden can comment some of those. He might actually know some of those in that he knows these players quite well. And so just with the last minute or so I've got to conclude, just a couple, key messages. One, a high emission future does represent that sort of major risk to the Canadian ski industry. That's not the future we want to end up with. Positively, policy trends are taking us away from that, so that's good. Regardless of which emissions path we end up on, all ski areas are going to have to adapt one way or the other for changes in their climate that they have to work with. Inter and intra-regional market competitions are going to change over time as well. So for that, investing and strongly advocating for that net zero transition that we know we can be part of, if for nothing else, is in our self-interest. We need to be part of that solution. We want to tell people that we can be part of that solution. All of our ski areas or resorts, are going to have to assess and disclose their climate risk probably within the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years at the worst or at the most. Many of you will want to get ahead of that curve. But the good news, as I said, is, most of the Canadian ski tourism can be made compatible with the net zero economy of 2050. And we need to tell that story, develop our roadmap so that governments, investors, communities, and our public and all of our supporters know we can be part of that solution and be part of the future tourism economy. So with that, I look forward to working with any of you to make this happen, and I'll turn it back over to you, Izzy, and hopefully stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Dan.
Give me 1 second. I think it went away.
Yeah.
Did it?
You're good.
You're all good?
We're perfect. Thank you. Dan, that was really, really powerful. And I like the slides that you were showing at the start that kind of showed a high emission scenario and a low emission scenario. Just one thing to maybe that we can spell out to people is that high emissions scenario is very similar to the path that we're on. So with little intervention, if we stay on this current path, it's kind of, we're sunsetting the industry in many ways. But that low emissions pathway is very much tied to the Paris Climate Agreement and our commitments to that. And the point that I wanted to make on that is that when POW does its work, we're basing our policy requests and our lobby work on that low emissions aligned with Paris Climate Agreement framework. So I just wanted to kind of highlight, bring some color to what the high emissions and low emissions mean in a practical way. Thanks, Dan. Our next speaker is Auden Schendler. As many of you know, Auden is the Senior Vice President of Sustainability at Aspen Ski Company. And I first met Auden on a camping trip in Yosemite. And I totally, like, clear as day, remember sitting around a campfire with him, drinking bourbon with maple syrup in it, and being totally in awe of the wisdom and passion that this guy has around climate action. He's an author, climate activist, a business person who really works for those large scale solutions to climate change, primarily through movement building, policy, and through the outdoor industry. Auden is also on the board of Protect Our Winters, but in the US, and he's been commissioner of Colorado's Clean Air Quality Control Commission and is a member of town council in Basalt, Colorado. So Auden, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share.
Great. Well, I was in awe of Dave in Yosemite because he created what I call a Canadian old-fashioned, mixing Canadian maple syrup with rye whiskey and an ice cube. Delicious. And Dan, that was good stuff. I actually have a couple comments on your slides. One is, the science you showed, where they say we're supposed to have X season, but their predictions didn't pay out in reality. The season length in some ways isn't a great metric because a few years ago we hosted the World Cup finals. It was 60 degrees. We were salting the course at 9 in the morning and we were done racing by 11. And the park in town at Aspen at 8,000 feet was 6 inches of water. So resorts are, ingenious at staying open, but season length is not the same thing as a quality season. This year was our 3rd or 4th driest start ever. In addition to the pandemic, we didn't really have snow into mid-January. So, I think Cam Wobus's work that you cited is actually going to play out in 2050. And, what you're experiencing today, where you are, I'm just as a kind of science nerd blown away by that, because those are the temperatures you see in Phoenix, because Phoenix isn't tempered by the ocean. And when you have Portland on the ocean, it's supposed to keep you cool. And the fact that it's not is really mind-boggling. And then, one comment on the, I'm going to get to the climate collaborative. I have a comment on that. But I'm going to talk briefly about the role of resorts. And I want to share with you, recently I published kind of a comprehensive overview of my thinking around sustainability in the last 25 years. And I just put the link to that in the chat. So feel free to not read it, to use it to put you to sleep, but I think you'll find it interesting because it's the evolution, my evolution, and I think you'll see evolution in business over time. The part of that evolution that plays out in the climate charter, the climate collaborative charter that was released recently by the big major resorts in the US is, what's the role of resorts? And by the way, that charter was spearheaded by another frostback like all of you, David Perry, who you know from Whistler, who I like to say we taught him everything he knows about climate, and then he went out and rolled it out. And so to his credit, he's actually back in my valley, living here now. But the problem with these things when the industry rolls them out, they always say the same thing. They say, we're going to do operational greening, and then we're going to advocate. And Dave, you beautifully laid out the role of POW in using the outdoor industry like the NRA to own the climate issue in Washington. We're bigger, we're wealthier, we're sexier, we're stronger, we're more powerful, but we don't typically get politically active. Well, we should, and that's what POW's trying to do. But these charters typically say, we'll do the green stuff on the ground and we'll advocate. And the advocacy always gets kicked to the side, or it ends up being signing on to a letter with 500 other resorts or 500 other businesses, and it doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is when a business uses its corporate power to drive change in material ways. And Dave, you were talking about how business always has lobbied for its own interest. But if you look at the business community at large, including the ones that are talking a lot about climate, look at the big tech companies, they talk a lot about climate. But when they get into Washington and when they use their paid K Street lobbyists, they aren't talking about climate. There's a study out by a recent study showed that Apple, Facebook, Google, those guys, they're spending 4% of their K Street lobbying dollars on climate. So basically they're saying we care about this, but they're not actually doing it. So the question for the industry is, what's your role? Dan, I think you laid it out pretty well. It's two things. It's role modeling the solution for the world in a way that you can uniquely do because you have to rebuild hotels, for example, and you have to run an operation with buses and cars and so forth. And then it's wielding the power that you have as a unique, understandably climate affected entity and wielding that power to drive political change. I'm going to give you just a few examples of how we've thought about that in the past and enacted it and how we're doing it today, but then we should have a conversation. So quickly, Dan rightly pointed out that one of the key climate solutions is building electrification. If you build a new hotel at a ski resort and heat it with natural gas, you're emitting CO2 for the next 50 years, at least. If you heat it with electricity, even in the United States, it's going to become cleaner and cleaner over time. But this is brand new technology, even though it's not, it's new to the engineering community, and you need models of this. So an example of two projects, one we just finished, one we're working on, was we built an employee housing project, also another major issue facing ski resort communities. It's 4 stories, it's all electric, it's on the mass transit hub, it's serviced by EV chargers and by loaner bikes, and it's a solution for the region. And when we did this project, engineers would say, oh, you can't use heat pumps in cold climates, that's the technology. And we say, yeah, we did it already. So we're trying to do that next in Mammoth, where we're going to build a hotel that we think we can do all electric and geothermal. Now, again, these things don't solve the climate problem. And so we're only doing those because we're Aspen and because we want to demonstrate to the powerful guests who come to our resort, but also come to your resort, that these solutions are good. They can be done in luxury settings or standard settings, and the solutions exist. The technology exists. You're also demonstrating this to policymakers. But the real work that has to happen is power wielding. And I want to give you a couple examples of how we've thought about that over time. When this whole movement started 25, 30 years ago, it was all focused on getting clean power. And we said, we're going to buy clean power too. And we actually did it, but we soon realized that it was just a paper transaction and that it wasn't causing systems change. And if you had to think about the ski industry's approach to climate, it has always been about individual resort action versus systemic change. And if we're going to exist in the future, we're going to have to pivot to the concept of systemic change. And so we said, you know what, we're not going to buy clean power. We've never made the claim that we're 100% renewable. And we've never talked about carbon neutrality. Instead, we looked at our utility and we said, what is it? Well, it turns out it's a rural electric co-op. It's governed by a board. And we spent 15 years community organizing, changing who was on the board by running candidates and supporting their elections. That utility went from almost 100% coal to now 40% renewables and headed toward 100% by end of decade. Now, the metaphor that best explains this is the old CEO was a weightlifter. His thing was squatting like 400 pounds, that was his deal. And the new CEO is a climate scientist. That's the kind of transition you need to get to. Couple other examples of how we're thinking about this problem. How can you wield power? Well, one of the big systems battles on climate is against the fossil fuel industry. And I proposed to my management and ownership that Aspen Skiing Company should sue ExxonMobil. And we should sue them because in 1957, they knew exactly what their work was going to do to the climate. Actually, a scientist there said it's probably going to warm about 1 degree Celsius by 2020. He was exactly right. But they knew that, they buried the science, and we believe you can show monetary harm that was done to the industry, the ski industry. Well, I ran it up the flagpole and it was a bridge too far for our ownership because when you sue Exxon, it becomes pretty problematic. But you should sue Exxon. This is the kind of thing you need to think about. And I have all the info if you're interested in that. And I'm not joking. Just a couple of other quick examples. In the United States, 25% of CO2 emissions come from public lands. And Biden came into office and he said, I'm going to put a pause on oil and gas drilling on public lands. Now, all of you know, you can't meet the Paris targets if you continue to extract oil and gas from the ground. That's the crazy thing. You can't do additional extraction. So we came in, intervened legally in Wyoming against an energy group that had sued Biden. And we said, no, we're coming in as the snow sports industry. not as environmentalists, but as business people in Colorado and Wyoming, which has a huge ski industry, and we're going to defend Biden. So these are the unlikely kinds of things that you need to be involved in if you want to actually move the needle and achieve the kind of mid-warming future that is entirely plausible. I'm going to stop there, Dave, to let Izzy go and to see if we have questions.
Yeah, thanks, Auden. Actually, are there questions that people want to ask of Auden? Marion says Sue Exxon. But are there questions that people have for Auden at this stage, or should we wait until the end? We're fine with either if you want to have a conversation right now. And Auden, I think one thing that dawned on me there when you were talking about that analogy of the CEO who can bench press 100 and is or 400 pounds and can also, and then the new person is a climate scientist. I'm pretty sure Dan can bench press 400 pounds, so he could maybe be both. He could be the next CEO.
Clearly.
Yeah. Clearly, yeah.
Okay, well, if we don't have any comments right now for Auden, then why don't we get Izzy on board here, and she's going to talk specifically about our resort alliance. And then once we've had kind of all three of these things together, hopefully there can be some questions afterwards. Just as a backgrounder, Izzy Lynch, she's our program director here at POW Canada. She's based in Revelstoke. She's a pro skier, a phenomenal skier, and really has done remarkable things in her work here at Protect Our Winters, and we're very fortunate to have her. And so as part of her role, she's responsible for the resort program and has put a lot of time and energy into meeting with some of you to find out how we can best position this program. And we're super thrilled with what we've been able to pull together. So Izzy, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. I will do the same screen share. Let's see, where are we here? And loading. Can everyone see that? I can't see you anymore, so I'm assuming unless anyone's speaking up, it's good to go. Well, yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come and learn about the program and the science and also accomplishments that some of our fellow resorts have achieved over the past time. I remember first seeing Auden in the Sherpa cinema film All I Can years and years ago and being really inspired by his messaging then. So it's cool to see that it's just still as strong as ever. My name's Izzy, as Dave mentioned, and I'm a lifelong skier. I grew up in ski racing in Alberta, and then I moved to Revelstoke, British Columbia in 2008. And my career has taken me kind of all over the ski industry, from ski coach to athlete, filmmaker, sales and marketing director in the heli ski world, and finally here at POW, where I feel like it's just kind of the melting pot of all my experience and passions are coming together, and it's really amazing to be working with POW. So I'm also a mother. I have a 4-year-old who absolutely loves to ski and another baby on the way in about a month. And that I find has really inspired the work that, like the effort in the work that we do at POW for me. Skiing has shaped my life personally, and it's so fun to see my son learning to love it. And I want him to be able to do that for years and years, and his kids to be able to do that. So that's kind of the driving force behind the work that I do with POW personally. So I'm here to talk about the resort program. And first I'll do a quick rundown on POW. Dave did a good brief at the beginning, but just so you're all clear, our mission at POW is well, we're a passionate community of outdoor enthusiasts, which I'm sure you can all relate to, professional athletes and industry brands uniting to advocate for policy solutions to climate change. So we believe our love of adventure and nature demands our participation in the fight to protect it. Shoot, can you still see my, whoops, I don't know what happened there. And our vision, we want all communities and outdoor playgrounds to be healthy, safe, and resilient to a changing climate. We want a future where we've transformed our economy and energy systems and cut our carbon emissions in line with science-based targets that the world agreed to in the Paris Climate Agreement. The policies that kind of drive our work and anchor the campaigns that we put out are renewables, so transitioning to a clean, renewable energy economy. Carbon pricing, we really believe in putting a federally set price on carbon, and that's a really effective way to reduce emissions and mitigate climate change. Fossil fuel divestment, so you might have noticed if you follow us on social media, we've launched a big divestment campaign today. So we want Canada's banks and pension funds to lead the transition to a decarbonized economy, which they're not currently doing, and we're pushing hard for that. And then finally, nature-based solutions. So conserving, restoring, and managing ecosystems, such as forests, old growth forests, which we've seen a lot of action around lately in the West, wetlands, in a way that reduces climate change and impacts and improves biodiversity. So what you're all here today is to, the reason is to learn about the Power Resort program. And the Power Resort program is, we are building an alliance of Canadian ski resort operators who recognize they're on the front lines of climate change and are taking bold action against it. And for anyone out west right now, it's hard to deny that we're on the front lines of climate change. It's supposed to go up to 42 degrees here in Revelstoke today, I think. So the members that are part of this program, they are pledging 3 things, basically: to make sustainability a priority for their resort, to advocate for climate protection, a big one that's been highlighted a lot, and support POW's mission to turn outdoor enthusiasts into effective climate advocates. So I'll just go through the whys of why join the Resort Alliance. So as you heard previously, climate change is affecting your resort's bottom line, and it's doing that by shortening our seasons and taking away our terrain, lower elevation terrain. And so that's putting the viability of many ski resorts at risk. Under a high emission pathway, the plausibility of maintaining the very important 100-day season is becoming more and more difficult for a lot of resorts. Dan spoke to this. So this is from his research, but on a low, we are guaranteed a reduced season length, and whether we're on a low emission pathway or high emission pathway. Right now we're on a high emission pathway, which is really scary. Season length will likely be reduced about 15 to 22% by 2050 with closures Christmas and March break, which are very important times of the year to be open for a lot of resorts. And this is based on the Eastern data that he presented earlier. So yeah, well, another why, we have the opportunity, as Auden said, to shape the future of skiing. It's our job to be the leaders in this movement. So we work with a team of professional athlete ambassadors. This is Ashley Mciver, Olympic gold medalist in ski cross, and she advocates a lot for this climate action. She says, we need to think big picture here and take it upon ourselves to make changes now for the long run. I want my son Oaks to be able to ski on snow throughout his entire lifetime. And even more importantly, I want this beautiful planet to stay healthy. That's the real goal here, to fight climate change and save our planet. Skiing is just the icing on the cake. But we know that for ski resorts, skiing is more than just the icing on the cake. It determines your bottom line, operating days and seasonal temperatures. And we know the science is clear. We need bold action aligned with the Paris Agreement to make that happen. Another reason why taking a stance on environment is really important to your guests, skiers and snowboarders, snow sports enthusiasts, outdoor enthusiasts. Studies show that 94% of Gen Z and 87% of millennials believe that companies should address social and environmental issues and are willing to spend more money on products that are sustainable. So most likely, most of your guests would be behind you if you took a stance on climate. Winter is in our hands, as Dave mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's really interesting to see all these other industries organizing in a way to influence policy decisions. Why aren't we doing that? We want to see the ski industry in Canada and worldwide get together and take action against climate change. So our mission is to come together and create a powerful voice with collaborative influence. And then finally, our community, our POW community, is really powerful. We have a large community of snow sports enthusiasts, and they're young, progressive, and influential. They're working hard to make changes however they can. And as a Resort Alliance member, you're provided a connection to that audience, to these people that care so deeply about climate change and saving and protecting the places and the things that they love to do. This is just a bit of these are some numbers on who our audience is. So we currently have around 21,000 members. We have 58 athletes in our Athlete Alliance, Ambassador Alliance. We have 36 brands in our Partner Alliance. The reach of our Athlete Alliance is huge. It's 2.9 million. We have a great CRM open rate. People are really engaged with the content we send, and we're really conscious of how much we send and when we send it. And in 2020, POW campaigns prevented that many metric tons of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. And who we are. So a large number of our, the majority of our members are between 18 and 44 years old. So we really fall in that Gen Z millennial kind of scope. And that's really interesting because I think in terms of environmental organizations, we draw in, we like to say we're kind of like the gateway to environmental advocacy. Like we draw people in when they're young and excited and energetic about this. And that's not the case for all environmental organizations and the typical kind of member you would see there. So yeah, we have a really exciting audience and membership that are stoked to take action. So as far as the program goes, what you would be able to expect from POW is we want to support you in climate action and climate advocacy. So we've created a bank of climate action resources that you would have access to. It's a huge list of event and advocacy ideas. You would have connection to our regional chapter groups. So we have 11 regional chapters across Canada. Most likely you're somewhat close to one of them. Our ambassador team, and Dan offered his services, so our Science Alliance. And then a list of industry-specific programs, consultants, certification programs that can help you walk the talk on climate action and sustainability for your infrastructure operations. And we also really push diversity, equity, and inclusion action as well as part of this whole process. So you would get access to that. You would have access to climate education resources. So we are building right now this enthusiast to advocate training tool that will help train people to become educated on POW and also basic climate science and climate action. And we would give you access to that and really encourage you to dispense that amongst your staff. Make it a part of your yearly staff training. Incentivize your staff to do it. The more climate advocates you have in-house, the more we're going to be spreading this message. And it's just a really good way to start the advocacy process, is educating your staff. You would receive an invitation to a yearly resort sustainability leadership summit. So your leadership team would come to this virtual seminar and we'll help you to be more prepared, knowledgeable, and poised to lead on climate. We'll have leaders in the resort sustainability movement, climate scientists, and then offer some case studies from resorts that are doing a really good job of all of this. That would most likely, that will happen in the spring. You'll receive a digital toolkit, so a bank of assets that can help you activate our partnership on site. So yeah, we would look to these resorts to get really creative with signage and calls to action and pushing POW and the climate action message to their guests. And then a brand activation kit. So you will have the opportunity to purchase like POW banners and flags and stuff from our wholesalers. And we would send you a small kit to get you going with stickers and things like that. Your logo will be featured on the resort program page of protectourwinters.ca. And we will mention you as POW Resort partners on our social media channels throughout the year when appropriate. And then finally, we would do a yearly climate review with you. So you will connect with the lead on the resort program. So as I mentioned, I'm pregnant. I'm going to be going on mat leave in the next month, and we have Anik Shampoo. She's if you've worked in Whistler, you most likely know her. She was the head of brand there for 10 years or so. She's coming on to replace me for the next year. So she'll be the main contact for the program for the next year. And she'll most likely be performing those yearly climate reviews, which are just a basic review, assess your current sustainability initiatives, and discuss steps that will be happening going forward. And what we expect from our Resort Alliance members, so we push progress over perfection in everyone that we're connected to. We want you to commit to the Resort Alliance pledge and do your best. Just take stock of where you're at and make a plan to take small, sustainable steps to a better future. We don't expect you to be net zero overnight, but we do expect you to have goals to work towards that. We look, as Dave mentioned, to membership development. So there's power in numbers, and the more members we have as part of POW, the more influence we have over policy decisions in Canada. So help us build membership through giving us exposure to your guests. There's a fundraising commitment. So in lieu of a yearly fee, we want this to be a really accessible program to resorts of all sizes. So we ask that resort members host a fundraiser / awareness event to show your commitment to POW. And we've built out a list of ideas for that in the resort program package. And I'm sure a lot of you have the ability to get really creative around that as well. We would look to you to showcase our partnership, so creatively share our message for climate action on site at your resort, like I mentioned. And we've seen that already at Tremblant, one of our current resort program partners, with gondola wraps and signage and stuff like that. And it's really neat to see. Educate your staff, so make climate education a priority for every member of your team. Appoint a climate champion. A lot of resorts already have them, a dedicated staff person to act as a climate champion on site, but some don't. And we just want to make that the norm at resorts across Canada. So this person will lead the charge on sustainability initiatives and keep us up to date on what's happening at your resort, as well as complete the yearly review and share POW info as appropriate with their team. And then we would ask you to complete that yearly review that I mentioned. So if this is interesting to you, the next steps would be to fill out the online registration form. So I will send that in a follow-up email to everyone attending this meeting. And then we can set up a follow-up meeting to confirm that and discuss the program in more detail. And if you have questions before you sign up, you can definitely email me and we can set a time for a meeting right away. And then, yeah, you would hit the ground running. It's summer, so we would love to see this program launching with a lot of the resorts come fall when kind of ski season is rolling in. So you would integrate POW and climate action into your resort operations, plan your yearly fundraiser and advocacy initiatives, attend the Resort Sustainability Leadership Summit, and complete your yearly review. And we'll just try and keep that rolling and build on the momentum year after year. Now we have some time for questions yeah, for any of the speakers. So I'll open up the floor for questions.
Don't be shy. You have access to 3 very knowledgeable people in this space, and I totally encourage you to unmute yourself and ask a question or put it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with, or follow up afterwards. Any takers?
I also love hearing from resorts on where they're at in the sustainability journey, because I know some are far down the line. It's really inspiring, and some are unsure of where to start. And so, yeah, if anyone kind of wants to share or chat about that, either here or via email, just shoot me a message. It's really nice to know where the Canadian resorts are in this process. So my email is izzy@protectourwinters.ca. I think you've all received emails from me today.
Great. Well, you know, one of the things that Izzy talked about at the end or at the start of her presentation, sorry, was that we kind of see ourselves as like as a gateway into the climate space, and to use a drug analogy, if I can, we do kind of see ourselves as like as the marijuana in the climate space, that we're fun, we're you know, kind of cool and hip, and provide a pretty good experience. Now we're also criticized for that too, for maybe not being as serious or hardcore as we could be, but there are wonderful organizations like Greenpeace and others who do really good work and might provide more of that kind of crack cocaine experience. But I think when you think about taking this back to the powers that be at your resorts, or even the next step of getting it out to your members, I think that's important to know, that what we're doing here is totally based and rooted in science. It's relatively barrier-free for resorts to get in, and there really shouldn't be anything too controversial about your involvement with Protect Our Winters. At the end of the day, you know, we're all outdoor people. I grew up as someone that loves skiing and biking and canoeing, and I just came to a point where I realized, after I connected with Protect Our Winters, that love of adventure that I have should really mandate my participation in the fight to save and protect it. And I think once we make that connection with your guests and your members, they'll be grateful for the opportunity to be involved in this. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. You know, let's do this. We're building a movement. You guys are totally foundational to the success of this movement, and we need you on board 100%. So please don't hesitate to follow up with Izzy and Anik, and let's find great ways of bringing partnership to